I'd like to start this event by introducing the 5 excellent panelists we have today for the panel discussion event. And let me go through very briefly one by one. So first we have Saija Hollmen, a professor of practice in humanitarian architecture and currently also acting as a Vice Dean of Art and Creative Practices at Aalto University School of Arts, Design and Architecture, so-called Aalto Arts. And Pirjo Kääriäinen is followed. She is Associate Professor in Design and Materiality and from Aalto Arts. And we have another Aalto professor, Lohmann. She is a Professor of Practice in Contemporary Design, also from Aalto Arts. And we have 2 panelists outside Aalto, but in the context of Finland. First, we have Akbar Mehta. He is a transmedia artist and artistic director at the Museum of Impossible Forms. Lastly, but not least, we have Kirsikka Vaajakallio, lead service designer at the Helsinki, London-based design agency Hellon. And my name is Namkyu Chun. I have been organizing this event, and today I serve as a moderator, co-moderator, together with Markéta for hopefully successful and more meaningful conversation with many of you all here. Perhaps Markéta, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you, Namkyu. So yeah, as Namkyu said, my name is Markéta Dolejšová. Together with Namkyu, we are both postdocs in the CreaTures project. So CreaTures are actually the main organizer or convener of this panel. And I think that if you, Namkyu, are done with your intro, I can probably very quickly introduce the CreaTures project itself. So let me just share my screen. And let me know, please, if you see it.
Yes.
Yeah, can you see it? Perfect. Okay, so yeah, welcome everyone again at this panel organized by CreaTures, or Creative Practices for Transformational Futures, as the full title of the project goes. So just to briefly introduce or summarize what the project is about, it is a 3 years Horizon 2020 project that explores the potential of creative art and design practices in supporting socio-ecological transformation towards sustainability. And by socio-ecological transformation, we refer in the project specifically to the integrated approach to sustainability outlined in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which highlight the close associations between environmental and social challenges. So really we are addressing these challenges as very deeply interlinked and intertwined in the project. The project functions as a consortium of 11 partners from across the field of sustainability-oriented art, design, and research. Among those 11 partners, there are 4 universities, including the RMIT, the University of Sussex, the Utrecht University, and also Aalto, who is also the main coordinator of the whole project. We also have 5 arts organizations involved, including Further Field, Zemos 98, Superflux, Hellon, and Kirsikka. And we also have 2 non-profit organizations called Sniffer and OK Finland that have a special expertise in sustainability brokering and the development of open knowledge. And actually 2 of our panelists today, Kirsikka from Hellon and Julia from Aalto Arts, are also part of the consortium as practitioners developing their creative projects together with the rest of the CreaTures creative and research team. So to outline a little bit, really very briefly, what we are doing in CreaTures and what we hope to achieve through the project. So we are starting from the standpoint that amidst the social crises and the environmental collapse that we are facing today in the world, there is an urgent need for new approaches and actions that can stabilize and restore social and ecological systems, and that also understand the deep linkage between these forms of social and ecological sustainability. And the main premise for us is that creative art and design practices hold immense potential in this regard, and that they have the ability to support sustainable transformations. But this potential is still largely unrecognized and underutilized today. And this may be partly due to the fact that the existing practices are often fragmented, poorly resourced, there is a lack of tools to evaluate them, and hence, as a result, they are often badly understood. So, starting from this proposition, our main aim in CreaTures is to conduct a systematic interrogation of the potential impact of these creative practices to create insights into their transformational potential. And this process in the project consists of several components. So first, of mapping and observing of various creative practices and initiatives that already exist. Second, of developing new experimental creative practices on our own within the consortium. And third, of evaluating both these new and existing practices for their impact. And all these processes are interweaved with a series of engagement events that enable broad access to the evolving outcomes of the project for different groups, including policy actors, the scientific community, and also, of course, the members of the public. So altogether, these four interrelated processes form the main work packages of the CreaTures project, namely the observatory, the laboratory, evaluation, and engagement. So through all this, our main goal in CreaTures is to collaboratively develop a so-called open creative practice framework as a tool to guide creative practices to transform society towards sustainable futures. But also other than that, other than the framework, there are some other planned outcomes of the project, such as the observatory's collection of transformational creative practices that already exist, the laboratory repertoire of new experimental creative practices co-developed within the consortium, then a series of tools and methods for engagement, education, and knowledge sharing in creative practices, and finally, the evaluation guidelines and policy recommendations, which also include alternative metrics and indicators for creative practices. So in other words, we really want to bring together diverse art and design practices that share the common intention to transform society. We also want to create insights that would allow such practices to focus their efforts more effectively. And we wish to help policymakers to see the merit of employing these creative techniques. But for now, we are still in the very initial phase of the whole process. And we have basically just started this summer to implement our first experimental productions developed in the laboratory. We have also just started compiling the existing examples of creative practices and gathering data about them. So it's all really still quite raw, you know, but also very exciting. And we hope today that this panel discussion will help us to shed some new light on these issues and processes that we are engaging with, and that all of us here in the Zoom will have a fruitful exchange today. So I will wrap it up here to not take too much time from this panel. So we have time to discuss actually. But before I pass the mic back to Namkyu, I would really like to say a big thank you to the Helsinki Design Week, not only for organizing fantastic festival, but also for providing a space for us for this discussion in their very dense and busy program. So thank you, Helsinki Design Week, from our flying creature. And I will pass it back to Namkyu now, who will outline some practical information and schedule of the whole panel.
Yeah, indeed. This Helsinki Design Week, especially this year, the theme toward like race toward like sustainability and etc. that really suits our CreaTures theme and the main outcome, expected outcome, etc. So it's a very nice fit between CreaTures theme and Helsinki Design Week. So I would like to go through some practicality, as Markéta said. So how we are structuring today's event is that we will start with a very brief introduction of each panelist. We especially asked them to prepare some practice-oriented introduction, so let their practice speak for themselves. Then we have more or less 1 hour long moderated discussion, meaning Markéta and we have some prepared question and then we will pose to the panelists. But in the meantime, while we are organizing this, feel free to ask your questions. I'm asking you all, dear fellow CreaTures who are in this meeting and the event, you can write any questions and we will later open up and revisit those questions. Or if there are some burning questions, we can perhaps also go through that in the moderated discussion. After this 1 hour discussion, we will open the discussion to audience and dedicate 30 minutes for open discussion. And lastly, we will have a bit more informal closing chat, meaning that we are basically letting you guys to talk informally, freely engaging, because sadly, we are organizing this event remotely through Zoom. But what is lacking despite this technological support is that we don't get to really see each other's face and a bit more formal. One person has to stop while talking, other person talking. So hopefully this more informal occasion help us perhaps have more engaging conversation, get to know different people and etc. So that's basically today's program. And perhaps we can start with the introduction of panelists.
So I will stop sharing my screen. And yes, thank you for that, Namkyu. So yes, if we can ask you, our fantastic panelists, to start introducing yourself, your background, and what do you do in the field of sustainable transformations. We have Saija first on the list. If you would like to share your screen or like introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I don't know about fantastic, but okay. So let me share. This is me. Namkyu was asking. Yes, it's me. I am as presented. I'm an architect and a professor of practice in humanitarian architecture, and also vice dean for arts and creative practices in the School of Arts in Aalto. But I'm also a singer, and this picture was taken from a production of Georg Friedrich Händel's Rinaldo. It was 2 years ago here in Helsinki, a premiere in Finland at least. And this little presentation is just I was asked to introduce myself and my different roles. I understood it in a way that my different roles in creative practices, and this certainly is one of those lives that I have. The other life which I have is my practice with my colleagues Jenny Reuter and Helena Sandman for over 20 years now. We've been working with community projects in the Global South. This one is taken from a women's center project in Senegal, which was actually completed a while ago, 2001, and this one in Kilimanjaro, Tanzania, a shelter project for victims of domestic violence, community projects with mostly vulnerable communities who do not often have a voice in their own societies. So through these projects where we're trying to give the voice to the voiceless through our organization called Ukumbi. It's a non-profit that we established some years ago to provide architectural services for communities in need. We also do art projects. This one was a snow show in Rovaniemi 2002, I remember. It's made of ice, as you can see, a projection of Ursa Minor, and it was a larger event altogether. So as a practitioner, I have many lives and many roles, and also as a vice dean, as an educator in university, I teach courses. Mainly, the main one is called Interplay of Cultures. This was taken from an exhibition a few years ago here in Helsinki. And as a vice dean, I see my role as a facilitator, as someone who might be able to provide opportunities and support people's doing their own projects and their own different lives and creative practices. So briefly, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think we will first go through all the 5 introductions, and then we will go on with the follow-up question. So does someone want to go next? The way I have you like outlined in my Zoom, I see Kirsikka as the second person. So if you can go.
Yes. Yes, just a minute, I will share my screen. Yes. And then the play mode. So are you hearing and seeing well?
Yes.
Okay, so like I already mentioned that I'm a Kirsikka Vaajakallio and lead service designer, but also employee experience director and partner in the Hellon. And Hellon is a customer experience design and innovation agency, and we've been existing a bit over 10 years now. And we are around 40 plus service design, business design, and data science professionals. And we have offices based in Helsinki and London, but we work quite globally. And although we are quite a diverse group of people, I think that we could say that the design is in our DNA. So that's where everything comes from. And I've been working in the Hellon since 2012. And before that, I was actually working in academia in Aalto University. And I was doing my PhD there and searching for and exploring different methods for the service design, and especially specializing for design games as a playful method for organizing and facilitating collaboration between different kind of stakeholders in the design process. And actually game kind of approach, but more like an end result, is also something that I'm quite much doing nowadays as well in my career. So we are actually doing quite a lot different kind of game-like solutions for different kind of organizations and stakeholders to facilitate the discussions around different kind of topics. And the sustainability is one of those topics, and the future opportunities and the possible futures as well. My biggest motivation at work is to help organizations to transform from product or expert-centered way of thinking and doing towards customer-centered organizations. So that brings normally together the employee experience and the customer experience, both which are really close to my heart. Being part of shaping the future is also something that I, of course, like very much be part of, and that's why I'm really interested in this project and why I see the value in this kind of panels as well. So we really need to think about how we can actually shape the future. I also have a 3-year-old daughter, and I would like to really much see that her and the other kids, that they can also have a good life, whatever it means, but in a nice way. Maybe one more thing here to say that what's really core of what I'm doing at the moment, and always has been my kind of red line in the work life, is that how we can bring the human back to the center of development. So there's a lot of organizations taking really technological point of view, that they start technology first, for example, or the product first, but we really like to do the human first thinking. And the slogan human to human is from that point of view, but of course it doesn't mean that we wouldn't acknowledge and embrace the social and the ecological and economical sustainability in all the solutions that we are doing. I think that's shortly about my presentation or introduction. I will stop sharing.
Thank you for that, Kirsikka.
Yes.
I like how it is really very diverse already, and only 2 panelists have introduced themselves so far. So can we continue with Pirjo as the next panelist to introduce herself?
Okay, so I will share my screen here. I work as a professor currently at the Aalto University at Aalto Department of Design, and but my background is in fact in industry. I used to work almost 20 years for Scandinavian textile commerce. And also the industrial aspects of that, not only business. What I've been doing maybe since 2011, I've been trying to, not only trying, but I've been experimenting with a collaboration between chemical engineering and design, especially in the field of bio-based materials. And we've been running ChemArts collaboration since 2012, together with my colleagues from chemical engineering. And I have to say that somehow I'm totally in it nowadays. So and it's quite amazing sometimes to recognize that somehow I've fallen in love with this chemistry. Even I don't know too much of chemistry, but I know quite a lot of materials nowadays. And of course, so the pillars that we are basing our collaboration, especially in the education, is this bio-based materials, always in collaboration. We use very hands-on type of experiments in addition, of course, of reading and writing, researching the materials that way as well. We have very student-driven approach, and it's really about co-learning. We always teach together. I teach together with my colleagues, and we don't want to speak anymore of co-learning. It's co-teaching. It's really about co-learning, because we always, as we tutors and teachers, we learn so much all the time, maybe more than our students in many cases. And yes, it's, but of course we also have some research projects running, and but this is maybe the core, the work that we do with the students. And another slide I wanted to share is what we see also as an important part in our work is the share. So we've been using design tools for communication also from the beginning. So we've been taking nice photographs, which is, by the way, quite, at least when we started 2013, it was a very new thing for material sciences. So we've been taking nice photographs. We have been sharing our work in various exhibitions, and this is our cookbook. It's not for food, it's for materials, and it's really a little bit kind of a playful thing that we wanted to share our students' ideas and experiments and try to get people interested in materials in general, because we are not, this is not about making material innovations so much, but it's more about trying to raise the interest to materials, because that way we can also work for the sustainability when people get little bit more focus on where they live, how they use things, and so where things come from. That's also surprisingly few people know where their stuff comes from. So it's one of the key issues we have. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. And can we have Ali next to share his background?
Yes. Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So hello, my name is Ali Akbar Mehta. I'm, as Namkyu already said, I'm a transmedia artist. I'm also partly, in a way, involved in Aalto University. I did my master's from the Visual Culture and Communication department, and right now I'm doing my doctoral studies in the Contemporary Art department, where my research is to look at online performativity within the context of archives. And I'm also the current artistic director of Museum of Impossible Forms, along with Marianne Savalampi. And together our roles, varied roles, are to curate the programming, liaison with the artists and guests that we have at the Museum of Impossible Forms, make the coffee, and oversee the day-to-day programming. And I'm here right now in my capacity as a representative of the collective and the para institution that is Museum of Impossible Forms. So I will, during our conversation, talk more about that. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you for that. And then we have Julia, I think, as the last panelist who hasn't introduced herself.
Great, hello.
Hello.
Let me see this on play. Yes, hello everybody. Very exciting to hear where everyone comes from. So I am a professor of contemporary design at Aalto University. I moved to Finland 2 years ago, and I've been fascinated with the role design plays, and especially this very expanded field of design plays in making sense of the many strange avenues we have opening up for our society in the 21st century. So design is coming from this clearly defined kind of practice of production and posters and toasters, as I like to say it, but it's moving really completely into a much broader field where we are very much designing the in-between the things. We are trying to help people to make sense of how their world is changing and who they are in this world. And each of these topics that are listed on this screen is a whole field in which you could embrace your role as a designer and try to figure out how to make these things possible. Me personally, I have been very fascinated with our relationship to nature and how we transform nature into the made world, and what ethical digressions and ethical changes these transformations entail. So I've been working a lot with animal products like leather and cow stomachs and all these things that we take for granted, but actually we should question where they come from, how we use it, how it's ethical. It's fine to use leather and then use it, because we as designers have such a responsibility for not just what we make from it, but how long it's being used, how we have less offcuts, how the leather itself is made, how the cow was bred, how the cow had a life, and so forth. So I'm interested in these transformations through the process of the design and in our relationship. And some critics have called my work ethical barometers that make us question how we engage with the natural world. 12 years ago, this investigation led me to Japan as an artist in residence, where I wanted to look at man and marine life and how we use the sea to sustain ourselves. And I came across this wonderful creature, which is seaweed, and grows 30 centimeters wide and up to 6 meters long. And while it grows, it just has a positive ecological impact. And it absolutely fascinated me, because when you have it in your hand, it's like leather. And just having worked with leather before in textiles, knowing how much damage can be done in this production process, I was fascinated by the idea of just pulling a piece of seaweed out of the water and working with it. And 12 years later, I'm still working on this. It has led me from a place of being the author of an object to being a facilitator of a community. This is me at the Department of Seaweed, which I founded. It's kind of a department that is a conceptual space, but also appearing in different locations at different times. And it's basically a collective of people who want to work with seaweed sustainably. This was in the V&A, where we had a residency for half a year, and it was all about this space between not knowing and sensing and thinking. And the idea was to actually investigate together with people what we could make from seaweed and how this future could shape up. This is one of the objects we made called the Okinaga node. And it's a big sculpture that shows a lot about seaweed. It's almost a portrait of the material's features. So it's designed together with the material and out of the material. And I developed this into a PhD. It's a method that I called co-speculation. It combines ideas of speculation, or speculative design, and transition design, because I think it's not enough to speculate about futures. We should try to use the design processes to actually bring together communities of practice that want to work together to kind of, you know, make the future happen. So if only I speculate about a future, I can see one perspective, but if what I create is a lens through which I allow other people to look and to kind of think and come from their own perspective, and if I then foster a dialogue around what we see and what we imagine, then we suddenly have a much broader range of visions and ideas. And that's it from my side.
Fantastic. Thank you all for the introduction. It certainly gives us many points to talk about today, especially with the theme of creative practices and the transformational future that we have as our project name. But before we get into a bit more like the larger or external part of maybe transformation, maybe we can start from very personal transformation that we have experienced. I mean, we have seen briefly through your introduction several career and transition between like different fields, from research to practice to academic, etc. But we are very much curious like about your motivations and reasons why you have chosen such paths. And basically, so let me clarify. How did you end up doing what you are doing? And what drove you to this specific type of creative work? Is there anyone who'd like to start? Maybe.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Yes. So how did I ended up here? That's a good question. I think like for all of us, probably it's partly like some intentional decisions and then some lucky incidents and mixture of things. But from the very young age, I actually wanted to become an industrial designer, and my motivation there was to really be able to have a positive impact for people's everyday life, and that was like the main motivation and directed me to see where I want to study and so on. And I think this core motivation is still there. So I still want to like have a positive impact on people's life. But now, like I told already in the beginning, I address this more from this like a customer experience and employee experience perspectives. And that's what has changed the way or the materials in a sense that I'm working with. But the creative mind and seeking solutions for future and opportunities to do things differently and like improving this everyday life, that's still pretty much there. It just has through the career has taken a little bit different focus from this academia to more practice and so on. And maybe one more like point here before handing to the next one, that when I'm listening this kind of sustainability discussions, and there's quite a lot of people working with the communities and those people who are really into the topic already, which is super valuable because then you can get a mass of people and you can get more done. But I also think that what's interesting in this CreaTures project, that for example our participation, we come quite close from the business side. So I hope that we can have a more direct impact for the business leaders thinking and how they can start seeing a little bit differently from their organization's point of view. So I think this is a one point that I hope that there is we can explore more how to do it actually.
Can I go? Yeah, for me, I wanted to be a vet when I was a child, and I really loved kind of running and playing in the forest. And then I realized that actually we did an internship in school, and all these people had such strange relationships with their animals, and I found it really weird. And I thought, no, I can't handle this. And then this became the topic of my work rather than the work itself. And I think this is something that I would like to tell everyone. I hear so many people saying, oh yeah, but you know, I'm a lawyer, it sucks being a lawyer, I want to do something for the environment. And I'm like, no, don't stop being a lawyer. We need great lawyers who do something for the environment. We need people who care about these things in every single place of work, and we need it the most in these places, in business, in law, and so forth, because we need to shift everything. So I then went to do communication design, and then I felt, and for me always design was the vehicle to transport ideas. So I always kind of wanted to also have the ideas and be allowed to put the ideas in as well, which is kind of controversial when you're a designer. And then I felt I mastered 2D, then I thought, oh, it would be great if I could do 3D. And then I went into product design for my master, and then I went into innovation design engineering for my PhD. So it seems like it's a few different strands to my bow. But if you ask me, I think I'm still doing communication design actually, with my objects, with my experiences.
Yeah, I really like this perspective that we need to transform everything. I think that you are giving us a very good segue to some of the other upcoming questions. But before we go there, also what Kirsikka mentioned before, this transition from more academic to more like business-oriented field or context. It is maybe interesting to compare it with the journey of Pirjo, for instance, who mentioned that you started in the textile industry and you worked there for quite a long time, I think, and then you transitioned to this role of being a professor at Aalto. So what was your motivation, or what drove you?
Well, in a way, I ended up a little bit by incident to the university. It was not as a result of a careful career planning, to be honest. Somehow I really enjoy this freedom in a way. Of course, we always have regulations and so, but still the not having the similar pressures that I was carrying for a long time. And of course, the textile industry that I used to work for is one of the most polluting industries in globally. And if we think of from the sustainability point of view, because I was working, when I was still working in industry, you know, we still had production here in Northern Hemisphere. So we, all the way from fibers to garments and so on, and woven things, knitted things, yarns and so on. So during when I was there, it moved away, and in a way it became a little bit abstract, started to become. And what is really interesting now that now I'm back in this at the academia, and now my colleagues are developing absolutely amazing new textile related to stuff suddenly, and that's something that I feel very motivated. I work also other things than textiles, but that's my backbone. my heart is still there, and it is so nice to see that we can do things in a new way, and maybe we can in the future this whole business commerce area may be somehow reborn also a little bit more locally here. So yeah, I'm so curious, and I'm so happy that I'm able to do this a different kind of contribution now.
I think that also works very nicely as a segue for Saija, who you have so many hats. I actually didn't know that you are also a singer on top of all those things. I found out
many
about
hats,
you online, but you're also doing it seems that you're trying to have this very positive impact, social impact in many fields, not just architecture. So
yeah, that is true. And I was just thinking how to answer that question, because from my background, there are so many threads and dimensions. And I think I wrote down two words: intuition and persistence. I mean, it's always, from one's personal point of view, in order for your motivation to be sustainable, it has to be grounded in your intuition somehow, because we are psychological beings We're also physical beings, although we're here all in a virtual space, but still. For me, I think it's all about this inner motivation that you can't sustain your interest in something unless you find it's meaningful. Music for me is one of those things that sort of keep me alive. It's soul food. It's something that I keep for myself, and if someone else takes pleasure of it, all fine. But it is a room for myself, more or less. And because it's not my profession, I have that as something valuable that sort of that I can breathe through, so to say. But then in my relation to the society, as my role as in my role as an architect, and the path that I've chosen to somehow work on the transformational processes of architectural practice towards more sustainable, more ethical ways of working, considering communities, vulnerable, low-resource communities in developing nations, mainly in the global south, as we have worked, it is a very, time-consuming and slow work that seriously requires persistence. You have to be motivated to do that. And in order to do that, you have to take care of yourself, of your own soul as well. And the fact that I ended up in university like Pirjo has a lot to do with serendipity. It was mainly an accident. And then all of a sudden, again, I follow my instinct, and only after having worked in practice for over 20 years, and much of it teaching in university, I only now have ended up finishing my own dissertation, so moving to research, because it then becomes relevant at some point that the knowledge and the insights that you've gained from your practice, how do you transform that into intellectual capacity or capital, so to say, in a university context, and how do you pass it on, or how do you share that? How do you become a co-learner with all your students and colleagues? So I ended up doing research, because that is always a learning process, and more you do that, more you're able to become a fruitful co-learner with your colleagues and students, to have something to share, and have again a variety of threads to pursue and offer insights and gain insights from your collaborators. So it's all about sharing and co-creating the transformation, the way I see it. Sorry about the fussy.
I don't know. With you also, Ali, like, do you see some parallels with yourself? Because you also, you are an artist yourself, but you also started being curator and cultural organizer, I guess, in the museum. So
yes, I mean that's I think that maybe requires a bit of an explanation. So in 2016, a collective of us, 7 of us, began the Museum of Impossible Forms actually by applying for a artistic project grant. And these 7 individuals are actually a diverse group of people who are artists, curators, pedagogists, researchers, poets, visual artists, etc. And when we started the museum, at that point of time, I think for us, it was very clear that that we were looking at our cultural space as a kind of a para-institutional model of working, which means that for us, the word museum in itself already contains within it the idea of the anti-museum, the counter-museum, or the para-museum. And for us, the museum as an entity that is a petrification machine for objects that are preserved in time was no longer an interesting idea, and is no longer the de facto model of what a museum should be. So for us, the museum was a space of engagement, of participation, and for us, the Museum of Impossible Forms, which is a space located in Kontola, which is in East Helsinki, is a decolonial, queer, feminist, norm-critical space. And I know I'm maybe now more talking about the museum and its entity rather than my own shifting graph, but the thing with but honestly, I think for me, being a part of this institutional working or para-institutional working for the last 4 years already sees a lot of transformation within it. We began as a collective. In the last 2 years, we transitioned into a para-institutional space, which means that we are not entirely opposed to the institutional model of working. We are interested in finding some kind of middle ground in our organizational or organizing principles that create a democratic, horizontal, and equitable space for working. And at the same time, a lot of our work is to do with creating spaces for those kind of practices that are not finding spaces in either institutional, educational institution, but also museum as institutions, and centralized spaces of art and cultural practice. And one of the main, or one of the core principles of our work is to also say that that culture does not belong only in the center. And this is a tendency that we have seen, that larger institutions, museums, cultural spaces tend to gravitate towards centers of, whether they are political centers, city centers, geographical centers, to create these centralizing forces. And for us to be in a suburb in East Helsinki was to also kind of say that culture does exist in margins and marginalized spaces, that they're not margins in themselves, that they're marginalized spaces. And those individuals or entities who are voiceless because they are made voiceless. So there is an agency that is acting against them. And by saying that we will open a space in the margins was to also kind of say that we're not interested in bringing culture to the margins, but to embed ourselves in those communities and work with them. So a lot of our work actually is to do with working with local schools, local institutions, local artists, and community-based organizations, and to develop a program or a curatorial practice out of that. So when I say that I'm an artist and I kind of haven't yet maybe taken on the role of being a curator, and this is now coming back to the question that you had, I still think of museum building as a critical artistic practice. I don't think of it so much as a curatorial engagement, although there is a lot of curatorial work involved. There is a lot of pedagogical work involved. And so maybe for me personally, and this is maybe not talking about the entire group now, for me, the artistic position is definitely, like Julia, you talked about design. So emphatically, I think I have a very similar kind of position vis-a-vis critical artistic practices. So yes, I will stop now.
Thank you for that. I also just want to mention that for the panelists, if you want to ask each other a question, then please feel free to do that, because we don't have to follow any strict script. But I also find it interesting that all of you are all somehow talking about some sort of diversity in your work, either the diversity of audiences, the other creative practitioners that you are engaging with, but also the diversity in the sense of transdisciplinarity, if we can use that word, and combining different perspectives and expertises from different fields. So in relation to the transformation and, you know, how can our work be transformational as creative practitioners? Does the sense of diversity or transdisciplinarity, how important is it in your work, and what role does it play? Or do you see this journey, this progress that you have done yourself as sort of important factor in your transformational work? And I'm just asking broadly all of you, so whomever feels like grabbing the mic, please do. Yes, Julia. Thanks.
So actually comes in 2 points. One is, at least for the projects I've been engaged with recently, it was super important to kind of really involve multiple disciplines into the whole creation project, just simply to know what is a good idea and what is a bad idea. Because the issues we're dealing with are very complex, and it's super easy to just do something that is, you know, like placative or, you know, very like too short in a way in thinking. And the minute you try to find a complex answer or complex, even phrase a complex question, you will have to involve lots of people with lots of very different ways of knowing. And these people quite often are in their own silos, and they are speaking in their own languages, and they are very often speaking to people who speak the same language as themselves. And I don't mean Finnish and English, I mean, you know, chemistry and biology and physics and social sciences. And I think this is where artists and designers become super valuable, because we are not scared to pose silly questions. We are not scared to, you know, go in and be, you know, we don't have to be a specialist. We don't have to pretend we're a specialist. We are a bridge builder and a networker, and we are able to contact these people and reach out and say, and then meet them face to face. And in this face-to-face meeting, it will become apparent that we don't understand anything if we are not, in a way, if we're not going to a third place where we can all understand each other. So I think the designer or artist can lead people into this third place and make them work together in this third place where we can actually overcome all these barriers and try and connect the knowledge. And I think this is in a way what we can do, what we can offer.
And I also think...
Yeah, sorry, go.
Oh, sorry, Kirsikka, please go. Say.
Oh, no, I was just continuing that I totally agree what Julia was saying. And I think that quite often this kind of transformation demands some sort of individual change of perspective or some new insight or something. And that normally happens best when you are exposed in a creative and positive way for different and even conflicting ideas and perspectives. And that's why this like a diversity is important. And that's why I also agree that these tools and ways and how designers and artists are used to work and engage people and also prompt these emotions and questions. So it's really valuable in this kind of transformational projects.
From a learning point of view, transformative learning theory, as was defined by Jack Mesirov or Patricia Crenton, etc., it's as both Julia and Kirsikka are saying, based on the notion that we all as human beings have our own tacit frames of reference. We have an abundance of habits of mind that we're not even aware of. And a transformation becomes possible when we become aware through a disruptive moment, a disorienting dilemma, as is defined in transformative learning theory, that we confront something that we're not used to. May that be whatever kind of event. And through discussion with our co-learners, we are able to become then aware of that way of thinking that we have not questioned before. So the transformation in your mind, in your habit, ways of thinking or habits of mind or frame of reference, point of view can happen through a disorienting dilemma, and then a genuine learning process can happen. And the disorienting dilemma maybe something that's provided through art and design or some kind of a collision or a clash that I think creative practices are in a crucial position to offer that kind of opportunities for learning. But it does take a community to share that with in an optimal scenario. Of course, you can also, confront your disorienting dilemma in a forest alone, but most likely in a society, if you want to engage others and be part of society. So the discourse is something that allows us then to evolve and learn from others and understand other people's points of view, so that a community of practice, community of learners can become aware of their own frames of references in a transformative way. So that's a bit from a learning theory point of view, but exactly what you were just describing, and for me, I think we're all here sharing these practices from a creative perspective, that this really can be vehicles for transformative learning, and thus also transforming societies.
Maybe I could say something on my behalf and add something very of my own experience. So to make these things happen, you really need to listen what others are saying. So the more and more because even if you are with your own agenda, but you are not able to kind of make such a moment that this communication might happen, so that the other person also understands what you try to say. And I think the key thing, we always discuss with my colleague from the chemical engineering, Tapani Vuorinen, that the only thing that sometimes matters is the willingness. So if you are willing to understand something or listen or try it, even if you don't understand, you might somehow still listen. You might not even agree, but so I think it's been the crucial point to on my activities. But still, I have to say it is really challenging to try to make this kind of a transformations. I mean, it's sometimes you think that you have done something, and then you surprisingly notice, okay, they didn't understand what I was meaning. But it is a really a long-term project. Requires time. It doesn't happen like in a moment. It takes time.
Listening, you're so right. Listening is probably the most important thing. A skill for all of us to learn.
But I think also daring to ask, because I think in so many situations you listen for a minute, you think, oh, I don't get it, and then probably it's not for me, and turn away. And I think in this moment, to not turn away, but to somehow create a moment when you are, either because your project carried you there, or because you think it's relevant, or because you're just persistent. I think it comes back, was it you saying persistence? But I think, when you're just not stopping to listen when you don't get it, but actually then keeping to ask and being humble enough to say, maybe I'm stupid, but I really still don't get it and still don't get it. But you need that on both sides almost. So you need the person you are engaging with to do the same, and that's the challenge sometimes. And with some people it's super nice and they get it, and you're having this dialogue, and with other people it's very hard because they don't get why you don't get it and get frustrated with you somehow. So it needs to happen on both sides, or all sides rather.
One thing that I have recognized about the challenges is that I think that sometimes one of the challenges that we are, as designers or creative practitioners, we are quite used to move between the scales of the really details and then the big, like a systemic complex issues. And like sometimes even within one sentence, we kind of like a jump in between and there and here. But for many professions or professionals, it's they are more or the like the position they are holding in the organization, for example, they are more used to certain level of issues and questions. And if we don't recognize that, it may sometimes be difficult to like keep them on going with us in a sense, or like understand these different levels. And I find that sometimes challenging for myself to like be aware of enough those different scales and different peoples. I'm like dealing with these things and how to help people at fit same way than designers, for example, are used to jump into this between the scales and learn from those scales, because I think that's the interesting there normally, that we try to understand the small details and the big picture and the individuals and the societies and so on.
Yeah, I think this is really what you are putting together, all these words. I think it really creates very nice mosaic, this willingness and ability to listen and persistence, or even the willingness to become somebody else through the work. I think it's really very important. And I was curious about, I remember, Julia, when we once discussed your seaweed project, where you mentioned that you are working with a lot of scientists, actually, biologists, marine biologists. How does this, like, how is your role of a designer accepted or appreciated? Like, do you sometimes, encounter some challenges in terms of not being the expert on the scientific field that you're engaging with, but having this creative approach and inputs?
Well, I think it always depends on the individuals. I've met scientists that were becoming designers or creatives themselves because they were frustrated with, for example, the people reading their research papers. There's one specific person I have in mind, Sam Dupont in Christineberg, and he was writing and researching on ocean acidification. But everyone who read his paper already knew about it. And so he was wondering, like, how can I reach out to, to other practices, to other people who should know about it and who have very little access. So he actually started making, like, rephrasing his research. He was still writing the paper, but he was also breeding shrimps in the conditions of now of 2030, 2050, and then cooking them and feeding them to people in supermarkets saying, taste the future, and then engaging with them on something that mattered to them. Like, the shrimp became a vehicle that was transporting an idea and showing the relevance to that kind of problem to people who lived far away from the ocean. And in a way, this is complete creative thinking of how can I transport this idea? What can I transport it on a cooked shrimp? Because that's what matters to people. And he was working with artists sometimes, and he phrased quite well what the artist gave him, because he said he was talking about one collaboration with an artist where they wanted children to feel like the ocean, to be the ocean, to, feel like they are experiencing what the ocean experienced. So they were brainstorming. He said to the artist, what do we do? And the artist like, we poison them. And in a way, it was such an outrageous thought that as a scientist, you would never kind of even throw it in the mix. But because he threw it in the mix, they developed something really cool, which was making the kids sign up to this experiment. And they said, nothing bad will happen, but something unexpected. And tomorrow when you come, you are the ocean and you do whatever we tell you. And they had to sign up for it. And they were all drinking this blue drink that made their pee completely blue in the end. And there was this moment of losing control, of kind of like, oh my God, somebody else has done something to me that I was not in control of, that really made this very powerful feeling of, this is how it feels to be the ocean somehow. And I just loved this conversation with that scientist because you could see what he was getting from art or from design. And quite often when scientists come to designers or to artists, that's not what they expect. So that's what we can give them, but sometimes we have to go through, oh, can you make my PowerPoint presentation nicer? And you're like, yeah, I can also do that, but, and then somehow kind of broaden the scope of what you can actually offer them.
Yeah, I really like that this comment on, like, what are the expectations actually from artists, in these transdisciplinary collaborations, that sometimes the expectations can be like you're going to bring in some very aesthetic, almost magical kind of layer into the scientific project, but you still need to stay within the limits of the scientific framework of that project that you have been invited to join. So it's almost going against of what we are doing as artists and creative practitioners. And then you are sometimes asked to create PowerPoint presentations that are nice, whatever that means. But I'm curious about the other panelists. Have you ever had similar experience like that?
But maybe I could also quickly say that I think what now Julia is talking about, and maybe this is also in a way related to my own experience is that we are all in some capacities trying to problem solve. And this method of working is also that when we're talking about listening and asking questions or daring to ask questions, I think the question then to ask is, what is the transformative future that we are interested in, and for whom? And one of the things is to do, apart from the things that were spoken about before, is also this idea of identifying the gaps and the problems. And this idea of identifying gaps within at least a cultural space or a cultural field and maybe I just give an example again of Museum of Impossible Forms and how it operated or began its operations was essentially to find a kind of a gap or a void in the artistic and cultural scene of Helsinki. And I think this kind of finding gaps and then attempting to fill it in itself becomes transformative in a immediate sense of the word, but also that there is a long-term process to it, and it is slow work. And for us, I think this idea of generating communities through the different events that we are actually now working with 20 different projects across cinema, music, performance, discursive programs, workshops of different kinds. So through each of these, we're building different communities. And these communities that we are also hoping through our own presence or the presence of the space, it tethers these communities as ongoing communities that expand and grow. So this idea of actually generating communities and tessellating then these communities to expand further into the world, but with certain kind of specific value systems. And so then, at least in the context of what we are trying to do, those value systems are to look at a certain kind of decolonized process of working, to look at queer feminist values, to look at what kind of futures are we interested in building within not just the bubble of art and culture, but also outside of it, within social sciences, within hard sciences, within activism-based work. A lot of our projects are to do with trying to negotiate and understand how the city actually functions. So city policies, city structural policies, the way that Helsinki as a municipality and a city is dealing with areas like Kontola or Maunula or Ida Haga and so on and so forth. And really trying to kind of question and understand that. So in a way, then also it transforms one's own practice from being this one kind of or a mono-dimensional artistic / curatorial practice into this this multi-dimensional process of working, which is happening in collaboration with multiple individuals, organizations, collaborators. So this idea of transformation actually is also a snowballing effect, and it only grows as you kind of keep at it. So this slow work actually at some point of time starts yielding some kind of, I mean, we don't know, or we didn't know at the beginning of our work that this is where we would be necessarily, but we knew what were the gaps that we needed to fill and what were the voids that we needed to address.
I think we start nicely from very personal transformation story, and then now we are start talking about, you know, our project and etc. And then this made me think quite one important element of creative practice, and also perhaps like work we've been involved, which is like, how do you actually evaluate? How do you know your work is succeeded? Like, how do you define success in your creative practices? Because oftentimes we came across these questions like this creative practice. How do you know if you have achieved something? I mean, one way to do is perhaps, as Ali put, like, if you consider question and answering this practice, maybe if you are answering the question that you pose, maybe that's the one way. But I'm curious to hear from the panelists.
Maybe I can say, well, in my architectural practice, when we work with low resource communities, it's actually the feedback from the community. I shouldn't say it's easy to measure, because it's never easy, but somehow you can sense if the project, first of all, has been engaging enough, if the community has taken over, in a sense, if we have been able to create a feeling of mental ownership. That means that we would have to be very much participating and engaging the community in the design phase and in the production of the building in this case. And then also in the construction, in the making of it, exploiting local know-how and sort of rooting the project in the local community. But in the end users, if the building itself sort of sits on the place in such a way that it seems that it's been there, it's always been there, that the community takes it as their own, and almost in a sense, if the architect, who was in this case Ans, who was behind the whole project and helped it materialize, is put aside, our best indicator of the project being successful is that we become obsolete, that we become unnecessary in the end. That means that we can exit the same scenario and the community can take over. So when you become redundant, then you've been successful.
I think that's a really, really nice way put, and I think it comes back to these scales and what Ali was saying also, this sometimes you are working with how the cities works or practice, or like a really big things, and the impact is maybe bigger but slower. So again, I think at least in our case, I try to think about it from the several levels, that there are these individuals who are part of this project and to whom we are collaborating, co-creating, engaging in this process of designing something. One success point may be that one or more of those people start to think differently or behave differently. So that's like a small scale success somehow, this individual perspective. Then normally there is some other targets or objectives why we are doing it. So if we are clear enough with those kind of targets, then we can try to see somehow that what are the other impacts or influence we are hoping for, and we can somehow see whether the teams of people or communities of people start behaving a bit differently or see things differently. Does the whole organization maybe change? They take new roles there, or they start working in a different material. So whatever it is that we are dealing, they launch a new service, for example, and how then the end users are, how many are choosing to use that and so on, how happy they are. So in the customer experience field, it's of course quite often measured that how happy the customers are on NPS, so that kind of scores. But again, then the other aspect is that how sustainable the solutions are. And that becomes again one hard question, and like Pirjo is looking much about these materialities, and you talk about this textile field, that it has a quite bad reputation at the moment, and like a sustainability point of view. So I think that how we are successful, we should be able a little bit more reflect on these different sustainability, these social and ecological and economical sustainable aspects there, and it becomes quite a hard thing to do actually.
I think in many cases it's really, this measuring is really problematic when you think of this kind of a creative practices and being creative and doing new things, and it is really difficult to measure, at least with these quantitative methods that are very often used in many other fields to measure the quality, for example. And it's so tiring, sometimes these discussions. So how to measure creativity? Well, if somebody solves that question, I don't know if that can be solved, and hopefully nobody will solve it in a way, because it would restrict the creativity on that's what I think. But of course we need to follow the success, and we can, like you've been, Kirsikka, for example, describing how it can be done in different fields.
It's also often quite a fugitive substance. It's almost like the flux that makes two elements come together. If it's that, bridge building kind of creativity, then it's not really that you can compare, I don't know, the form of the armchair before or after. You can kind of see whether it worked or not, but there are so many elements in it that it's hard to, you also don't have a comparative study where you then say, well, there I did it a different way, but everything else is the same. No, every element will be different. And it's always that you have to react on the ground when you see that there is a blockage in the process, that you then have to kind of unblock it. You kind of have to help all the elements of the whole piece to work together. And, if it doesn't work, it could be any of these elements. Quite often you know why it didn't work, but to prove it in a very objective form is quite hard.
I think
my question would be for the other panelists, and was it Saija who was saying earlier about this intuitive feelings and decision makings and so on. So do you think that actually also some part of the success in this creative field is actually also intuitive, that the people who are part of it, they kind of feel it, or does it? We are coming from the academic backgrounds, many of us, so we of course try to be quite analytical and reflective, but is it always necessary, or could it be that we actually are trained so that we have this gut feeling and intuitive feeling that whether we are successful or not?
I think
Sometimes
really
sorry. Sometimes that does not seem to be enough. That we might know, we might have this gut feeling, but then we have these funding bodies or somebody who is financing our activities, or the companies we work in. People who love numbers and understand numbers need these measurements. And that might be, I see also in the chat the question, why should we even measure creativity? But well, yeah, as a designer, we understand that it does not make sense, but you can try to discuss with a couple of people having, for example, financial background. So I think they would ask us, why don't you measure creativity?
That's why we need many different perspectives to challenge also these things. Maybe.
That's why we need more artists and designers in the world, and less.
I think I also sorry.
No.
I also think that we as creative practitioners, we're kind of navigating, as was said before, in different scales, in different levels of communication, as Kirsikka was pointing out, and also different audiences. And I think the point that creating or enhancing awareness of diversity, and I think that's one aspect of the work that we sharing engaging part of our work.
Yeah, just to kind of continue on that, and jokes apart, I think being in this kind of a position of being responsible for an organizational function and working, I think a large part of both Marianne, who's the co-artistic director with me, as well as for myself, a large part of our work actually has been to do with or dealing with numbers, to be dealing with Excel sheets and to make account reports and audit reports and manage budgets and make payments and receive payments, so on and so forth. And to the point where I also often joke that now my artistic practice actually, half of my artistic practice is actually on Excel sheets, and I've become pretty good at it. And now, right now, we are in the middle of a grant application period. So we are being asked by funding organizations, what are the successes of your organization? And we are having to provide a certain kind of statistical proof of that we did 100 events last year, we had 1,800 visitors, that we have 15,000 visitors in overall, and this is the way we have grown, and this is how many people we work with, this is how many people we invite, this is how much we pay people, so there is a certain kind of ethical mode of conduct, so on and so forth. But for us, those are not the parameters of success. Those are parameters of dialogue with people for whom those are parameters of success. So I think as a person who is fortunate to be involved in an organization for whom this is not really important, I can safely say that for us, it's much more rewarding when we see that there are communities that are growing for the last 4 years because of the kind of work that we have put into the space, that there are new organizations, new collectives, new groups that have formed who are doing similar kind of work on the basis of the kind of work that they began in the space, or for people to kind of come up to and say that, hey, Museum of Impossible Forms is one of the best spaces for this kind of work, for being and for feeling at home in. I think a lot of people feel that they feel very comfortable in the space, and that's also a mark of success for us. So I think we also need to redefine perhaps for ourselves what our parameters for success are. That yes, there is a statistical communication that is required for different purposes, but at the heart of it, what is success then is something we need to re-question.
Thank you everyone for this excellent way to actually evaluate creative practices, many reflection, I think many food for thought for the later evening and following days. But have you ever came across, I mean, this is one quick question, perhaps to end the moderate discussion before we open discussion to the audience, is that if you come across any organization, event, or artistic work, creative practices that you came across in the local area, one of the reasons why we are asking is that, you know, we are doing this event in the panel event, not for the whole, you know, planet Earth's sake. It's for kind of try to represent somehow the local community that we are based here, and not just Aalto or Helsinki, but, you know, Finland or in general, more or less. But if you have come across something that you find it like quite successfully delivering such transformational ideas or futures that you came across, that would be excellent. Just one, maybe.
I didn't know about the local, and unfortunately Ali is there themselves, so this Museum of Impossible Forms is already represented. But I was at in a way I can maybe Skype through the local. I was at Radical Relevances conference at Aalto 2 years ago, and there was an artist called Daskin Drums, and he teaches in Russia but is from the US originally, but he had was there with a performance, and basically he had worked with indigenous people of Northern America, of Canada I think, and he was basically working with them to translate their kind of anthem, their song, into the contemporary world. And the song is We Are the Caribou People. And he rephrased that poetry into We Are the Petroleum People. And then basically went through excerpt by excerpt, and he was delivering it as a performance with people where they would almost read this poem together and reflect on who we are as a society. And it went like, you know, we live off the petroleum, we eat petroleum, and so forth. And somehow I found that so relevant, and it stayed with me. And I didn't even see the performance, he just told me about it. But I just find these sentences, these wordings, and, you know, so often I'm in the supermarket and I see all this packaged stuff and I think, we are the petroleum people. There's no way to avoid this here. I am, you know, it's almost like a chant that is very sad, but it gave a very sad articulation to something I feel very often, and just giving the words to something you feel, I think is super powerful.
Maybe I could say one like a local or Finnish-based example that I think is inspiring. One of my colleagues has been developing this kind of Tivoli Utopia game, which is meant to be played with the children at the schools, for example, to help them to think about how you can shape this future or possible futures. And this more the Tivoli Utopia, the idea is it's the fun way in a sense, so to think about it, and the metaphor how they have created the game around this Tivoli metaphor. So I think the nice thing there is also that it's like a interesting tool for also young children to start thinking about, because of course they should be exposed in a positive ways for how they can be part of shaping the future, because not all of us are able to teach those things and skills at home maybe. So the more there is also these different ways that they can tackle the issue and play with the issue at the schools, for example. So Anna-Kaisa Varjus has been part of the group who has been designing this kind of game. So I think that's quite inspirational.
I think it is really important to actually collect all those cases and examples. That's why we also organize this panel, right? Because these are all the burning questions that we are trying to engage with in CreaTures. So already just sharing these other creative practices that exist and what they do and how they impact us, I think it's really, really important. When Ali, I also wanted to ask you actually, as a distant admirer of the Museum of Impossible Forms, if you have any good recommendations from your own repertoire from the...
Well, one of the projects that we're currently involved with that we're really very, very excited about is the project called An Entry to Iranian Music. And it's a series of 8 long workshop sessions that is dealing with looking at Iranian music and improvisation within Iranian music in the context of the kind of underrepresentation non-Western music receives within the university and Sibelius Academy conditions, and to really start looking at Iranian music then as an example of what are the kind of knowledges and forms of knowledges that are underrepresented and not really taught within institutional settings. And this is, in a way, one of the kind of things that we are really interested in doing, even through our Society of Cinema project, where we are looking at cinematic practices. And this year, for example, the work that we are doing is to look at having conversations and dialogues about women in cinema and the kind of patriarchal systematic oppression that exists within cinematic practices across the world. And so these two projects are something that I would really recommend. Well, but honestly, the thing is that on an average, we have 3 events a week. So drop in at any point of time, you will find something happening there.
Are you closed at the moment, or are you open again somehow?
We opened in the beginning of August, and we're right now operating very precariously, because we know that at any point of time there will be a kind of situation where we again need to close the doors. So a lot of our events now, like for example, the Iranian music event, the next one is on Saturday. We are doing simultaneous physical as well as Zoom events, so that if we need to completely switch over, it's not as much of a shock as it was the first time. But right now we are open. I could go on and on, so
yeah. But Saija and Pirjo, you must have also something to share. I mean, also from Aalto community, or you perhaps came across many exciting projects that you somehow put one foot in both, or you know, or from distance that you as a observer. Or too many.
Yeah, and I have to be honest, I've been sitting in front of the screen since early morning. So I start to be, my brain started to be a little bit slow. So I started to, when I was listening to Alia, I started to talk about one interesting project I saw last year in Philadelphia in one art museum, in fact, which was but I can't remember now the name of the artist, but it was an idea that they had a room, exactly the same room in, I think it was in Tehran, and the other one was there at the art museum at the Philadelphia. And it was really interesting because then they also had these screens, so that in a way, being in Philadelphia in that apartment, so it was, they had built the whole apartment there. Being in that apartment, you could also see what is happening in the double version in Tehran, if I remember correctly the place. And it was really and they were organizing, for example, same kind of events in both places. So in a way, very strange feeling being there, being part of that. What is real? What is not? Where am I? What is happening? So it was quite an interesting experience, personally also.
Was it in Design for Different Futures exhibition?
No, it wasn't. And in fact, it was in Pittsburgh, to be honest. If I'll find the name of the artist, I will write it.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I think that we are secretly signaling to each other with Namkyu in the back channel that we should slowly move on to the open discussion, because I believe that we will have a lot of questions from the audience.
I mean, I was asked about programs to share. I just... Sorry for that. Yeah. I somehow missed half the question because I was so thrilled with the stuff in the chat, and I followed the link, so I missed part of the conversation. I shared one. I mean, there's a gazillion examples, but I should dive into that a little bit more. But there's at least one that's one of my favorites, Ask Letters and Numbers from the US. They're doing incredibly creative stuff and very interdisciplinary in a very holistic way. And that's one of transformational programs that I know, at least, and have come across. There are many.
Thank you for that. So now should we move on to the questions from the other participants?
Yes.
From the audience. I think we can try to do the strategy of just asking you to like call your name and ask you to ask your question out loud. If it is still relevant, the question. So I can see in the chat that there are two questions right at the beginning from Valeska. Would you like to phrase them yourself if you are here with us? Valeska Tulny, I hope I pronounced it correctly. I'm really sorry if not.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, thanks. Thanks for the interesting talk. The first question actually was like I shared the link with a friend, Heike, and she sent it, so that's why my name is there. So what she asked was, I'd be curious, what was your biggest learning working on socio-ecological transformations, and what advice would you give people who would like to work in that field? And Heike, maybe I can invite you to to this talk to say something.
Yeah, thanks a lot for reading out my question. I rejoined and actually couldn't read that anymore, but that sums it up pretty well. How to start working in that field, and maybe what can we learn from your learnings of the past year? I would be really interested in that.
I think I would like to say something. I read this question already like half an hour ago. I'm like, oh, interesting question. I think one of the key learnings I had that took me forever to realize, and it's very banal, is that our entire educational system is set out to teach people how to go all the way to the concept phase and present beautiful concepts, and then have a portfolio and graduate with a portfolio of beautiful concepts. But that you actually, if you want to have any change happening, that actually all happens after the concept. It's in this very slow graft of implementing, of doing something that Ali was also mentioning. So quite often it's like 9 months for a concept, and then you give birth to it. And then if you leave it there and you don't find a place where to, anybody who takes care of it, it will die there. It will just be, a beautiful concept baby, but that's it. And it takes 18 years to raise that concept to a viable community, to something that works, especially if it's something that goes against the grain of kind of the normal commercial day-to-day, where you don't have to just build the community, but actually the framework in which it operates, and the, like, where does the money come from? Who owns the pain? Whose problems are you addressing? So I think we have to get a lot better at finding ways of raising these conceptual babies, either raising them ourselves or building villages, like building networks of people who have an interest in raising them with mentors and so forth, having places that take care of them, that help them come to life. And I don't know, I mean, I've become a bit allergic to these wonderful ideas presented as a TED Talk. And then you look 10 years later, like, what came of this very inspiring TED Talk? And then you're like, well, nothing, that's it. It was just an idea. And in a way, that energy of the TED Talk was there. And the problem then is that if anybody else has that idea and wants to raise, wants to develop it 10 years later, that first energy is gone. People will be like, yeah, but I've seen that years ago. That surely is already in place. And so I think there is a certain responsibility to raise some of the ideas you have, or to find somebody who takes care of them. And we have to, I think, as educators, we have to, and I don't know, as society builders, we have to become a lot better in enabling practitioners to raise their ideas.
If I may add, I think the bigger the project, the slower and the longer it takes. In our case, when we do these architectural projects, the first one took 5 years, from the first design to the actual opening of the building. And a lot of that is about someone, as Julia was saying, someone owning the project, someone who has the persistence, has the intuition, has the persistence, has the decisive action to take it further. And in a moment of desperation, you somehow need to find the strength and meaningfulness in there, and rooting it and engaging the community in order for it to become sustainable. In our project, when we work in a different continent altogether, it's always the thing that because we have engagements here in Finland, so we can't live very long in these different countries, but then it means that you have to work with someone who is an active actor. We've chosen to work with local NGOs who are very, very aware of the needs of the local community, who are there, who have the capacity to sustain the activities when we are gone. So we as designers, we can act as catalysts, so to say, and someone who keeps the thing alive. And it requires a lot of, respect, humility, and awareness of the fact that we as human beings are very similar everywhere. We have similar kind of needs and hopes and wishes and humor. And with a smile, you can actually break a lot of barriers, and laughter can take you very far. But building that kind of personal relations, but also navigating different levels of networks, trying to network with different stakeholders on very different levels, and sustaining as long as needed until you can see that something gets done and has a life of its own. So Julia, you're exactly right that from a good idea, it's like a talent you have. Unless you cultivate it, unless you persistently keep it going, it just remains an empty letter. So it takes a lot of persistence and humility to move forward, especially in the projects that you cannot so well measure, that are from the artistic side, are the quality of them is the decisive element, and the people's engagement. You can't measure those in numbers, but you can measure them in meaningfulness and in the shining of the children's eyes, if you may say. And those are immaterial and unmeasurable rewards, but it's something that for me at least is a measure of a transformation in society.
Thank you. I could not agree more with you to what you just said. Maybe the practical tip from my point of view is that how you can do that thing that you just described, Saija and Julia, is that from the very beginning on, creating explicitly maybe some visual stakeholder mapping. All the time when you learn more, it's a living object in the sense itself, that you gather your information, your understanding, and there make it more explicit that what matters to these different people. So it goes back to this listening and understanding these different perspectives, what gains and losses there are for different people, individuals, stakeholders, organizations who are or could be involved. And keeping that as a living object in a sense, this kind of a stakeholder and value creation understanding map or something like that.
I often think like having some kind of a ball in my hand, that you try to make change, you try to make an impact in a long-term impact for something, and in a way you have this. You try to keep it up, you do different kind of small and bigger gestures to keep it up there, and then you just hope that there are other people who will take it, who have other balls maybe, or come and join you. So it's sometimes you think, does it make sense at all? But you need to believe that okay, I just need to keep on doing that, and one day you start to see some real changes also. So it's requires plenty of persistence, really.
Maybe I could also add that apart from persistence, I think one of the things that was talked about initially was also this idea of increasing the stakeholders. I think when you start increasing the stakeholders and you make an entire community or communities of people believe in the thing that you are doing, and maybe it's not relevant equally across the various conversations, but when people start believing in the value of what it is that you're doing, then it starts becoming at least a little easier to sustain it. And that's at least something that we have found to be true.
One more add-on maybe there. I did once a mistake that I did not understand during the project that actually the final call whether to continue implementation of the project was really political issue, and not in the minute. It was like Department of Education that I was working, and I thought that there was a really high level people from there collaborating with us. So I kind of thought that was enough, but I didn't understand how their budget are coming from, or didn't think about it and be aware of it. And in the end, it was really sad how we were not able to final steps to like argument and engage these true decision makers, these politicians who were like at the moment of doing these budgets. So from that day on, it has been years now. So from that on, I'm lucky that I had that experience, because now I'm quite aware of this, trying to map these different stakeholders, like Ali was also mentioning, and trying to understand that who actually I need to be involved, that things can change and be implemented.
I think that's a super interesting point, because I think we all know of projects that failed, and maybe they weren't mentioned here because we were asked to say successful projects, but it's also very interesting to look at why projects fail and when they fail. And very often it's like, you know, they fail after 2 years, after the first phase of funding runs out because it's not new anymore. Or they fail because it's become one person's idea, like Ali was saying, and then everyone else is like, yeah, but why should I support that person's idea? Because they became too much centered to one person rather than to that community they were serving. Or they fail because what you said now, that somehow the hierarchies were missing, or that there was nobody to hand it over to, nobody who actually had an interest in that conceptual baby and to raise it. So yeah, I think by looking at why things fail, we can learn a lot at how to structure that, setup.
The failures are the greatest learning experiences always. We should have a seminar on sharing failures. I mean, that would be the most fruitful probably, and more, sharing the most shameful failures ever, and those would be the biggest learning examples. I'm sure we all have those.
Good.
I agree. I'm in if you organize that kind of seminar.
Me too. I have a lot to share.
I think there are two projects in that context that maybe I can talk about, or not talk about, but just mention. There is one which is called Museum of Failures, which I actually look at quite often. And there's also another project called, it's called the archive, no, not the, now I forget. It's the Archive of Unrealized Projects, and it's a repository of artistic projects that never got realized because of some issue. So I think this, but I mean, in all of this, I think it's also interesting to kind of think about or talk about the fact that we are now talking about persistence, we're talking about increasing the stakeholders, and we're talking about slow work, we talked about before, but that all of these are components which are expected to come from within, or from the community and the team that is actually working on this. And we have talked a lot about funding. I mean, in the sense that it has gotten mentioned, and that, as I understand, a lot of, or many of our projects are dependent on outside funding. And what are the power dynamics and the power relations between the projects that we are invested or involved with and the funding and the body of funding that we're seeking funding from? What is the relationship, and how does one navigate that? but maybe this has become a question and it can go to the bottom of the pile.
I think that connected also to the topic of failures and their value and benefit. There is a question in the chat from Anna Salmi, who is asking about the shared resources, but also shared responsibilities and risk-taking. So maybe, Anna, do you want to ask the question yourself, if you are still here with us?
Sorry, can you read it? It's so noisy in the background.
Okay, so it's many of you highlight the importance of sharing spaces, learnings, language, perspectives. In the face of global environmental crisis, what does sharing risk and responsibility mean to you?
My brother, who is also an artist, said to me the other day, quite fittingly, he was like, yeah, the more desperate people are, the more they turn to artists to sort it all out. And I was like, it's quite a cynical thing to say, but sometimes I agree that we shouldn't be put in a position where we have to solve something because it's beyond our scope of possibility. And sometimes I see the danger that if we're suggesting with, you know, some of this programming of like 48 hours to solve this, let's get together, let's do it, that we are not just promising too much, but that we're setting ourselves up for failure. Like, if I don't manage to solve this in 48 hours, what do I do in the next 48 hours? You know, what it's kind of, it's a risk of pretending we can solve it alone because we can't. And yeah.
On that note, maybe I should also mention that Helsinki and especially Aalto University is pretty big on hackathons, which I'm very skeptical of, just for the record. But I mean, just to kind of think about it in the context of what the words in the question are, I mean, there is risk and responsibility. And at least in terms of risk, we're obviously talking about risk management. And in that context, also talking about management of responsibility. And management is a governance or an administrative tool. And so when artists and creative practitioners are looking at management creatively, I think that definitely has many interesting implications. But I think the first thing that I would, and I'm speaking for myself, the first thing I would do is actually to question those who are in positions of governance and management vis-a-vis the risks and the management of risk. So, I mean, this whole context of one of the things that we're talking about with environmental sustainability and environmental impact is, and I mean, not saying that this is what we're doing at the Museum of Possible Forms, but I think many of us are pretty invested in the idea of how do we affect the conversation. And many of us are actually, many of the members of the collective are actively involved in different kind of activist groups in which they are working towards this. One is also got into politics, running for candidacy. So this idea of artists actually being able to or willing to actually move into different zones of contact and transitioning across spaces beyond the initial parameters of an artistic practice also kind of is a very, for me, a creative solution to this idea of risk management and checking responsibility and checking privilege.
I also think that it comes a little bit about this transparency and communication. And also again, back to this, that we need to really listen and understand these different stakes and perspectives, especially like in a current social media times. and quite strong political agendas many people have. So there is a lot of unintentional things may happen if we are not aware of, and that comes back to this, like also how people take maybe personal risks when they are part of these kind of transformational projects in a different ways. It may be from the next career step, or it may be more like in that personal thing, but like I think that this we definitely need to be able to share the risk and responsibility, because as was talked earlier, this is not a one-man show, but we need a lot of people involved. But at the same time, it's really, I think we need to consider this transparency and communication.
I think the whole idea of sharing, whether it's you know, risk or whether responsibility, is very interesting, because I think it was you, Ali, who mentioned values, and I personally found that it's very easy to share things with people, knowledge or whatever it is, with people who share the same values, because it means that we are all trying on different pathways to reach a future where we all agree that that's, you know, that could be great to reach in a way. So the more the merrier, the more we try on different ways, the better the chance that one person will, you know, succeed and help the others to kind of find the right pathway. So I think this whole idea of sharing could also be a lot more clearly defined, because what I figure out is that there is not one outcome of a design process, but at least 5. There is the thing that you've made, whether it's a website or an object. Then there is the knowledge how to make that thing. Then there is a community of people around creating something like this. So almost like the infrastructure to make that knowledge happen and so forth. And then I think there were 2 more things, but basically there's maybe the plan of the thing. And then, so basically you can share in so many different ways. And if we are just always, in the beginning, I was quite afraid to share some things because there's IP and you're like, oh, you should patent this and so forth. But actually if we become more articulate about how to share, then we can make clear from the beginning of a process that, hey, the thing will stay with you under the, you know, demands that you will take care of it and you will make sure it lives on, for example. So we can be much better in articulating and sharing the responsibility of making the thing come to life, basically. And it helps us be less afraid and maybe have less misunderstandings in the process when we are more articulate about the different outcomes of a design process.
Sorry, I was muted. I can see also, Namkyu, that you're mentioning that you can quote someone, you know, from this area of issues, switching from responsibility to responsibility.
Yeah, actually, it was my partner, Julia Valle-Noronha, like talking about, like, it's not just being, I mean, maybe perhaps what we mean by responsibility is like being able to respond certain way. I mean, I guess as a creative practitioner, we can respond creative manner, but I mean, creativity can have many different definitions. So the way we can somehow accommodate certain situation and address and respond really like to certain situation. I guess that was something perhaps relevant in my view. So I just put that in the chat.
I see that there is a continuation question that about the specific tools that help to establish transparency. Maybe someone else has a good example, but one way that I have recognized, or one thing is really important, and usually when I'm talking about now in the organizational transformation and change context, and there's a lot of lack in resources and skills for internal communication in even a big organization. So there's a lot of efforts put for external communications, but it's quite poor often how you resourced or how you think about it, this internal communication, that what's going on, why it's going on, and really like trying again from that perspective, understand what's there that matters, what the people may be afraid of or interested in, and how you should be then like a transparent and open what's happening and what's not, and who can participate, and what can be the end result and the promise or not, and so on. So there's again a lot of topics around to be concerned or like really thinking about. So this is not like maybe a correct answer for you, but more about, again, that's something to be aware of, that how you build this kind of like internal communication and have a resources and actually do it as well as you would do for the external like means.
Could I also maybe ask if Valeska, could you clarify what you mean by transparency? Because I think for me to answer that, it's also first to understand whether we're talking about transparency in the sense of some kind of a institutional transparency as opposed to communication, and because for me, the idea of transparency is also very much linked to providing security and also vulnerability of information, and who is asking or who is demanding for transparency from whom. And very often we see that it is in fact governments asking for transparency from its citizens, while at the same time not providing it in return. And one of the things that I think for us as a politically conscious or socio-politically conscious organization or individuals and artists, what we are very aware of, or what we should be aware of, is that transparency actually must be demanded from the bottom up rather from the top down. So maybe just wanted to have that different take, although thank you for your answer as well.
I thank you. I can tell where my thoughts were coming from. I was looking at it from the communicational aspect, especially in the business environment. So yeah, I think to give a project the chance for like transformation, it's super important to get everyone involved and make clear what the goals are, and therefore to find this common understanding and to share it. I'm searching for tools actually for my thesis that might support in that matter. That's my motivation of that question.
I think thank you, Ali, also for the continuation and about the explanation. Then afterwards, I think it's also one question that comes to me sometimes, especially now when we are part of this CreaTures project, and we are exploring ways that how we can be more explicitly part of reshaping the future or influencing in the organization's way of working or helping them to refigure their business model from more sustainability point of view, for example. So what's our political agenda? What's our agenda there? Because at the same time, we are a private organization. We are also doing it as a consultancy work. And we don't have yet this kind of official Hellon level answer, because this is again that we are still co-creating and having this dialogue and the discourse within us, that how different individuals feels about this sustainability and the service design, business design, and the different angles and the you can do it a little or not at all, or you can do the negative or positive impact and so on. So I think it's also this transparency comes that why we are here or why we want to be this. And for example, at the moment, we are still like learning as well. But we also want to, like I said in the very beginning of my own personal inspiration, why I want to be shaping the future and be an active actor there, if possible, is that I have my own daughter. I feel really bad about the current situation that I really want things to develop into a good direction, if it's possible, rather than some more, from my perspective, no negative ones. And that's a personal stake, of course, why I want to be involved and thinking about these things. But I think then it comes again back to this, that whose perspective, whose point of view is this desired future? So it's not an easy question, but so thank you about all these reflections.
I think it really ties nicely to what you have all been mentioning earlier about, the ability to listen and to the willingness to even become someone else during the transformative creative process. Speaking about this business perspective, for instance, that Hellon is taking in the CreaTures pilot study that we had with Hellon already, I already found it really interesting how all of us were kind of accustoming, to the perspective that you were having there, the more business-oriented perspective. And I think it really requires sort of like go beyond yourself and accept, that the other side that you are not familiar with can have relevant insights and relevant perspectives. And just through this short pilot project with Hellon, it was already like very nicely surfaced. So I think it's really a very interesting insight. But if I can also suggest, since we are already more than 2 hours in the discussion and some people are already leaving, maybe we can, if you other participants have questions, just feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you wish and ask your questions directly, and we can slowly move to the less sort of moderated or formal part of the session.
Everyone's shy in this.
Yeah, I can also see that there are some CreaTures members in the audience, so maybe you want to ask some questions or share some thoughts or insights. But of course, if everyone is tired, then we can't force it.
I find it really interesting maybe to think a little bit what came out of this discussion, because a little bit to my surprise, because of course these panels are always difficult on Zoom, I think there were quite a lot of resonances and insights. So maybe it's like worth thinking also whether and how we come together again. I mean, there was this idea of like speaking about failures, and then there were some awesome ideas about, the structures, maybe coming out of these failures, like what you did wrong, and then learning from it, the learnings from the failures of how to structure and set up projects to give them the best chance of succeeding. I think there was one question we didn't really answer, or kind of one second question, whether our educational systems are set up well to support this kind of work. I don't think they are. I think it's hard to ask them to be entirely set up, because I think they need to move from this period of early life education, very fixed, like these are the 3 years I go to the school, to being more of a hub that you are a community you're part of for your entire life, and where you are also kind of freely giving later, maybe when you have a studio and you have a free desk and you are saying, well, this kind of project I really believe in, I want to support, and I can be the mentor for it, or somehow that we become more of a village that raises these children together, basically, that we are, really trying to support each other. And of course, that's a very different in a way, we're reaching the museum there again. Why I'm also very interested in the museum, because it is that kind of space, or it should be, or it could be, the space that doesn't just give us a back mirror into the past and makes us realize who we are by looking at the past, but that actually helps us to come together to think about the future and to test it and to be a safe space, like a sandbox for what would this mean, that is apart from society, but transient enough that people can come in for half a day, or they can come in every day for 2 months if they want to, and volunteer to give their time. The beauty of the museum is also there that it doesn't have these bridges. It should ideally be for everyone. Of course, the museum is struggling to be for everyone with the way it's set up, but it could be for everyone. It could be something that a place where you go when you want to think, when you want to be challenged, when you want to be involved, and you want to share your thinking. But I think the university should be that place too. And it tries to be, but a lot of its setup makes it less so, because we have to have certain time in which people go through it and they are expected to come out of it. Otherwise, we're not meeting the merits and getting the funding and so forth. So it's kind of, can people come out of the university very quickly because they know they're still tied to it forever anyway, and can be engaged and can have access and can, continue to exchange because they are part of the community. I think that would be good.
Yeah, I think this is really so important, because maybe also just the word transformation, it's just so huge and so complex, and I can imagine it. Not just imagine, I know it's intimidating for myself at least. If I think about myself as creative practitioner who wants to start with this area, it just sounds like a very heavy and very long task. So having these structures at universities, the supportive structures that guide you through the process and explain very clearly even what transformation means in different languages from different perspectives. I think it's really important. And there was also, I think, a question like that at the beginning in the chat, asking, so how can we start as students, with this whole field, because it's such a complex topic. So, and we all don't want to end up being these hackathon type of contributors, making quick fix solutions for something. So I think it can be really challenging, but exactly through what you mentioned, Julia. Hopefully it can be overcome. Yeah,
I think actually hackathons can also be great, because it can bring the people together to start something. But very often it ends there, basically. So I think it needs to be picked up then and be enabled further, and have like a bit of, I don't know, maybe it's funding again, or maybe it's time again, or maybe it's like a pledge that you make at the end that you continue with the things.
Mm.
I think it's also a little bit related to like design sprints, and one example that we are actually working at the moment with Nordic. Oh no, I'm lost. Sorry, in my mind. I need to check my. But this kind of a design sprint model, this eco design sprint with the design forum that we are doing at the moment, and that's kind of a training program intended for SMEs and design agencies that are interested in the business opportunities of the circular economy. So it's like a sprint model way of training, but the end result at best may be a little bit like a new kind of business model, so which may have some kind of impact. But again, of course, it's how they take it from there. And I think then it's quite important that who is actually involved in this design sprint so that it may have the next life and not just that inspirational moment there. But it goes a little bit like hackathon. I think that if it's really intended to take something from there, it may have an impact. But if it's more like just gathering, it's maybe that it's not the, so again, I would start from the humans. So human to human, I like so and the kind of one of our values is the dare to care. So kind of also again starting from the people, that what is the purpose of organizing, doing something? Is it then the hackathon, or is it that we want to just have the hackathon because of the technology or hackathon? So that's maybe the question there.
I think Tuuli asked, I would be curious to know about the social context of co-creation in transformational practices.
Yeah, I could even say out loud that it's been really nice listening to you, and I've heard Kirsikka, for example, saying some of the values and the DNA of the team in Hellon, but and the rest of you have been talking more about talking with others or listening to others. And I'm just wondering if there are some components in the teamwork or this co-creation within your practices that you could share with us.
Kirsikka, do you start with that? Or
seems to be empty head and the brain at the moment. So if someone else has some immediate, I think that the co-creation is of course super important and core of what we do. So it's and like we talked earlier on, that it's also, it can be kind of core value, but it's also I think that this kind of engagement is the only way to make a difference or make the change. People need to be part of it and doing it together, like was discussed very early on, to have the diversity and so I think it's needed. I don't know if this answers to Tuuli's question at all.
I think one of the most interesting things for me that came out of our discussion was this whole idea of that you're not designing this event, whether it's a sprint or whatever it is, but that you're also already in the design process thinking of who needs to be there for it to continue, who takes it on, like how do I prepare the bed for that, the ideas that come out, and you know, the soil they go into, how they can continue growing and so forth. And in a way, there is not so much design literature about these next, like what needs to be prepared for after the interventions, I think, or at least maybe I haven't found it yet. Maybe there are some great links and we can put them in here, because that would be super interesting to think more about.
Yeah, I think that's true. So one of these really important things is think about actually this. It's not just a question that we can answer maybe to Tuuli, but more again to be aware at mapping the social context, because that's something which is quite changing, and it's a different social context maybe in the beginning of this starting the process, and then what happens and when it's like several years taking it further or something like that, and how we actually can like be aware and make sure that things go as well as it can be.
Yeah, I can really, I also think that it is important. Some of you mentioned that, or actually all of you maybe mentioned it before, that, you know, the sort of transformation happens on the interpersonal level as well. And it might be tied to this continuity or the long-term aspect of our projects, right? If we keep self-reflecting throughout the project and sort of keep forming ourselves who we are, and still have the fuel to sort of go on beyond just one event, beyond just this discussion, you know, not just like closing the Zoom now and just forget about everything and go with something else. But I'm also curious what Julia mentioned with the lack of the literature on this sort of very long-term duration of design interventions.
Maybe I'm just ignorant and there is lots.
Maybe there is some, that's true. But I think it is critical, since the problems or challenges that we are facing are so complex and so long-term and have a long history as well, that we think about these interventions in a longer-term manner beyond just, you know, 3-year funding or this type of things.
Maybe one thing that we haven't discussed that much but relates to all of these topics, it's actually trust. And if we are dealing with the transformational practices, I think that's one of the key words still that we need to consider there, that building the trust with these different kind of stakeholders and in these different kind of social contexts. And that's why you need to understand them quite well, because what does it actually mean and how you can then be honestly part of that. So it's maybe one thing that just came to my mind now from Markéta's.
Maybe that's a good way to somehow wrap this, like the trust that we perhaps established through this event mutually. And I think it has been fantastic to listen, and so many directions that we maybe perhaps see how to develop. I mean, the panelists, we have this, perhaps the failure conference of failure maybe idea that is quite well established already, and then this the how to continue this discussion. I think that is another thing. So we have so many possibility to continue from this. But if there is any question, perhaps we can like lift this conversation more like informally. And I mean, no pressure, but you know, if you really have something to just go visit personal level, I mean, moderator out and individual audience and potentially other, I mean, some panelists who you can spare some more minute can stay here to go through some questions. What do you think? How that sounds? Yeah, Markéta.
I would just mention quickly what I see in the chat from Pirita. That
Yes.
in terms of continuation of discussion, so we are actually having this features platform, right? So we should be able to maintain some continuity, at least within the near future. And we will definitely try to do so. But the next step can be going for this discussion with Tuli, who is the scientific leader of the project. The discussion with the Design Museum. I don't know what is exactly the title, but it's on 23rd September. And you can see it in the chat. I don't know if Tuli is here. Yeah, she is. Can you tell us a little bit more details, maybe?
Yeah, well, let me put the camera on home context. So yeah, we'll absolutely continue this discussion with Zeynep Fala from Twitter from Hellon, and we're going to talk about CreaTures project related themes, and I'm going to challenge Zeynep, for example, to talk about this imagination and playfulness that are very much part of the CreaTures, and these kind of seeking potential futures and alternative futures, and trigger people's minds in hopeful futures.
Okay. And more events, I mean, as soon as we have more information about this event, we can share through Twitter and Facebook and etc. So stay tuned and be friends, not strangers. Yes.
Definitely. And
If-
also,
If I can recognize everybody by their name, then I will say hi.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, Markéta.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to mention that we are also planning to make a podcast of this panel of the recording. So when we will share it publicly, I don't exactly know when, but sometime in the near future. So yeah, that would definitely, we will let you know as well through the social media channels when it is out.
Super, it sounds lovely.
And I'm definitely looking forward to visit the Museum of Impossible Forms.
Yes, and everybody else as well is more than welcome. Please do come.
Yes, sounds really interesting to visit there.
Yeah, one of the things that I didn't talk about was, and it's like our pet project. This is something that we do on the first Saturday of every month, or at least we used to, is to host a free dinner for anybody to come attend and just have food. So we cook together, we eat together, and it's a non-event event, and it's something that we've really enjoyed and been doing now for multiple years. And I really hope soon we can resume it and to have you all for dinner sometime. Yeah.
That definitely sounds great.
Yeah. Super.
Sounds good. Yes. So perhaps like moderator, we turn off mic and leave it for maybe some minute if there's any conversation. But then thank you all again, like Markéta, and I will be off.
Yeah, I mean, thank you everyone and for staying for the whole time and for contributing to the discussion. And of course, thank you to the panelists. I think that now we only have Ali and Kirsikka but thank you for sharing all your experiences and thoughts.